Does Washington have the best offense in the country? Let's go to the film.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Huskies. I'm Roman Tomashoff. You know that guy over there. That's Lars Hanson. And then today with us, we have RPM Data's Ben Glassmire joining the show. Ben, we are so excited to have you here. And thank you to everybody out there for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. And Ben, you're a big tape guy. We're so excited to have you here. And you've been texting me all week with takes. And this is your opportunity to just kind of get those takes out there. Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of hand you the floor here and we're going to have some fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's going to be fun. I think you asked at the beginning of the show, top of the show, does Washington have the best offense in the country? And the answer is, I feel like it's pretty clearly yes. I don't think you would have known that by watching the Arizona game. It wasn't obviously their best offensive showing. It wasn't bad. Like, I think if that's your bad day, that's a lot of teams' good days. If you look at some of the other teams around college football. But I also think you have to give a ton of credit to Arizona. I think that was the biggest takeaway for me coming away from that game, was just that I thought going into that game, they're missing DeLora, they're missing Michael Wiley. That's their two best, probably their two best offensive players besides McMillan. And they had a great game plan for Washington. We know what what Washington has done to other teams. Attacking vertically, hitting those deep shots. Penix is the best deep ball thrower in the country by a pretty large margin, I feel like, right now. And Arizona knew that. Arizona knew that going in, that they were going to have to stop that if they wanted to have any chance of winning. And just diving into the tape a little bit, I noticed that Arizona, the first thing I noticed was they were playing this it's called their dollar package. I was doing some research into it, but it's actually a 3-1-7. So they were playing 7 DBs for a third of the game. And you watch them drop into coverage, and you see two corners and 3 safeties will drop into deep zones. So it's you're watching this.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I actually do have a question for you about the film, because I was listening to my buddy Connor Rogers on the NFL Stock Exchange podcast the other day. And one thing he said when he went to the All-22 of this film is that there was a safety playing so far off the ball that you couldn't see him on the All-22 film. Can you confirm that? Because we haven't been able to look at it.
I actually have that. I noted that down. Do you remember Greg Williams when he was with the Browns and Jets, and he'd play the safety 30 yards off the ball or whatever? Arizona was doing that a pretty decent for a decent percentage of the game. I'm looking, where is this guy? There's only 10 out there. And then you realize that he's 30 yards off the ball. So it's just they had so much respect for Penix being able to throw the deep ball, and credit to Penix too. He was more willing to take that check down when it was there. I listened to the pod the other day, and you guys talked about Jeremy being that kind of outlet guy. And I think they did a really good job of utilizing that. Letting him get in the open field and make guys miss, because that's what he's best at. I tweeted out during the game, this coaching staff is so good at identifying what players' strengths are, especially on the offensive side, and then playing to those strengths. Obviously Jeremy is such a special athlete in terms of short area quickness and things like that. So getting him in the open field is so important for his skill set. And I think that worked out really well during the game.
Lars, what do you got for us?
Yeah,
You've been silent.
I was gonna say, it was nice. This is nice to hear somebody else carrying it. But no, Ben's absolutely right. I think that's kind of the thing. It was almost like the recipe from the Cal game last year, where if you take away the deep shot, Washington's going to be either forced to thread the needle and you're going to make a mistake, potentially, like the UCLA game, or you just take the checkdowns and kind of just nickel and dime them. And with the problem with that is Washington drives become longer, and then you have less drives as a result when you add on the running clock and things like that, which is new this year and things like that. So I think that's why the score was what it was, right? You're still scoring 31, but it's when your offense is traditionally scoring 40 plus, it's what did Arizona do that great of a job? Well, they did, but also it's the combination of their offensive attack and their defensive game plan allowed Washington, or kind of forced Washington to really kind of make longer drives, and that's what kind of also was a different part of the game than the first 4 games.
I will say, just kind of listening to you talk, Ben, and that's why I was so excited that we were able to get you on the show today. Were you surprised that Ryan Grubb didn't just choose to run the ball a little bit more, especially when you see 7 defensive backs on the field and somebody so far off the ball that Dylan Johnson, who's just such a big, powerful dude, didn't take advantage of that a little bit more?
I honestly, I was a little bit surprised. That was kind of one of the things that I thought about in terms of like teams are now going to see this Arizona game plan that they came out with and say, hey, like we obviously, and even coming up for the Oregon game, like we don't have the guys to match up with Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Julian Polk, Jeremy Bernard. So we are going to play guys so far off the ball to limit those deep shots. So I think there is going to be an adjustment, and maybe that's something Grubb didn't want to show against Arizona, that they were more willing to run the ball because in the end they didn't need to in that game. But I think against Oregon, if Oregon does choose to run that same, like a similar game plan against that, they are going to need to run the ball more because those lanes are going to be there, as we saw in the Arizona game. Like Dylan Johnson had his best game of the season. I thought he looked tremendous. He looks, he looks explosive. He's powerful. He's got the tools to be that kind of lead back in the backfield. So I do think in the future going forward, I think they are going to want to use that running game to supplement the passing game and just make defenses not be so willing to play a 3-1-7 against them. I think that running game is going to kind of help, suck the defense in a little bit more.
I like that a lot. And Lars, it's something I know you and I have talked about, and something we talked about on the show the other day, is that, do you think that this might end up opening up more opportunities for guys like Will Nixon and even Tybo Rogers, who Ryan Grubb has just like shown really consistently over the last couple of weeks that he's super duper high on? Do you think that that's something where we might end up even seeing more 2-back sets on the field to just kind of take advantage of so many defensive backs on the field, if that's like just say what Oregon wants to play a lot of in this matchup that we're going to see?
Yeah, I think so. And also the key factor in all three, Dylan Johnson, Will Nixon, and even Tybo now, they all can pass catch really well too. In addition to being good running backs, that's kind of the triple threat that they have. You can run the ball, you can pass catch, and you can also pass block. That's what you have to be able to do. So keeping multiple backs in, I think having Jeremy as that second back is it's good to get him the ball in space, but it almost felt like it was forced, right? It's almost like, hey, you're trying to really like square peg in a square hole, but it's like a different size, right? It's like you're really trying to force it. It's a good idea. It's a good thought. Maybe do it a little bit less because you want to have an actual running back who can get more carries and do things like that than necessarily force a wide receiver into that position more often than not.
I like that. And that's something that Ryan Grubb did say a lot actually in his press conference was, yeah, we kind of almost forced the ball to him a little bit too much and just kind of, yeah, it is a nice wrinkle to have him out of the backfield. And that's something that now teams are going to have to be aware of. But how often are we actually going to see that? I do remember like the first play of the season, they came out with just five wide receivers and lined up 2 of them in the backfield before splitting them out. So I know that that's something that is possible in this offense. And Ben, I know that one person that you just love to talk about with me off the air is Josh Cuevas. And is this somewhere where we might be able to see a little bit more of him too, just kind of against some of these defensive backs?
I think that is like, if a team is going to be willing to play 7 DBs, like Cuevas is a perfect counter to that because he is so athletic. He is big. He's going to be big. He can outmuscle these defenders. We saw it in that game. We saw them being more willing to put Josh Cuevas out there. That he had that 50-yard catch, where they kind of leaked him out and then got him a good matchup with some, I think, a safety or a linebacker. But you can get him those matchups if teams are willing to play 7 DBs and play so deep. You're going to get good matchups for Josh Cuevas, and I even think some of the other tight ends like Devin Culp is a good athlete. You're going to have those matchups that if they're more willing to put tight ends out there on those type of plays, they are going to get good matchups for their tight ends.
And that's something with Jack Westover as well, too, where he's so good in space, just with the ball in his hands, that even if he's picking up 7, 8, 9 yards on a reception, that's just a good way for the offense to just kind of control the flow of the game. Because if they're going to, with all the talent that they have at every skill position, really, just the more that they can distribute the ball and just get everybody involved, the more that it's going to force just all these DBs to have to come down. If that is what Oregon and Tosh Lupoi decided to do on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, for sure. I think Oregon is kind of in a similar place to Arizona. I think they have better personnel than Arizona does, especially along the defensive line. But their DBs are just not, they don't really have any stars that you look at and you think, oh, they can match up with Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Julian Polk. Like, they don't have anyone who's going to be the neutralizer for any of those. So they are probably going to have to do some creative things in order to cover those guys. And they just kind of don't have that person, like those star players that you kind of have expected with Oregon in the past few years. So they're probably going to have to do some things to kind of take away something. They're going to have to choose to take away something, and it's probably going to be the deep ball. So that, like what Arizona did, they're going to want to stretch out Washington's drives so that they're not up 28. They don't put up 28 in the first quarter or something like that, and then they find themselves in, a 2-3 score hole. So I think that game plan, Arizona showed that can work. Again, I don't know what Washington is going to do to counter that. I'd assume that Grubb knows what they put on what Arizona did. He knows teams are going to see that and probably decide maybe, hey, we want to do something similar to that. So I think there's going to be an adjustment, and I'm curious to see what he comes up with for the Oregon game.
Lars, how many offensive linemen are going to be out there in the first play of the game? My bet is 7.
Well, I was going to say, if we're counting offensive linemen and tight ends and everything like that, I'd probably say 7 or 8. Yeah, easily. I mean, you could actually probably almost have you'd have 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, so you could have 8 on the line, either
a tight end.
No. That 8 is including 2 tight ends.
Oh, okay.
So I'm thinking 6 linemen, 2 tight ends, and then you have a receiver flanked out, and it's either a run pass option or some kind of all of a sudden both tight ends end up breaking out after being set up as blockers. And by the way, to circle back on Cuevas, that's one reason why he's gotten on the field, is because we all knew he could be a great pass catcher. His ability to run block and do things like that has also helped him on the field as well.
We're gonna flip the script to the defensive side here in just a minute, but we've got to take a break and talk about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophies, also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, moving on to the defensive side as Ben gets a look behind the scenes of the ad reads and how we do everything over here. We're going to talk a little bit about Washington's defense because, Ben, Lars and I talk about this all the time. We've gotten so much on the show about just Washington's defense, whether people are happy with it, whether people think that it's terrible and it's the worst defense in college football, which there really seems to be no in between in the comments sometimes. Speaking of which, feel free to leave a YouTube comment down below, especially if you like what Ben's throwing out there, because we love having him. I'm sure we're going to have him back again very soon on this show. But what have you seen from Washington's defense on film that might just kind of pique your interest, or just say this is something that needs to be improved? And anyway.
Yeah, I think I'll take the in-between. If no one's willing to take the in-between, I'll take the in-between. Although I do think you guys do a pretty good job of taking that in-between.
That's why we brought you on here.
I think you guys talked about it, but they did fine. Like, was it the best performance that they've ever put out? No, it was not. Like, there are things where you're shaking your head, you're frustrated with, you're watching, and it's not the best. But I think this defense, all they need to do is do what they need to do, if that makes sense. Like, they just need to get stops, make plays, like make the splash plays. I think that's honestly the biggest part, and that's the biggest difference between all their other games and the Arizona game, was they didn't really make a ton of splash plays. Like, they need, in order to get off the field, they're going to need turnovers. They're going to need sacks. They're going to need that to happen in order for them to get off the field and get the offense back onto the field. And Arizona knows that. I think, again, Arizona did a great job game planning. They came in with a backup quarterback, and they made it really easy for him. They gave him short passes. At halftime, he has like 80 yards passing on like 20 attempts. So it's like, what they're going to do. They're going to throw the short pass. They're going to let their guys make plays in space. And they are limiting his reads. Like, I think it was his first start ever in college football. So it's obviously, you need to make some things easy for him. They know also Washington tends to play their DBs pretty far off the receivers. They're pretty convinced that off coverage is the way to go for their guys. And I think that's fine. I think their personnel isn't quite, they want to protect their DBs basically. I think especially against some of these Arizona receivers like Cowing and Territoire McMillan, like they want to protect.
Yeah, it's Tyrone McMillan.
that pronunciation is not my strong suit. And they did a great job getting the ball out, letting those guys make plays. I would like to see a guy like Elijah Jackson play a little bit closer up to his receivers. Like, he has some struggles, obviously, as we've seen this season, but he's a really good tackler. He's a pretty good tackler. He's physical. He's long. I would love to see him play a little bit more press. Like, just get him up on the line, get him to be a little more physical. I would, even for some of their other guys, I would love to see that. Just kind of make quarterbacks uncomfortable, because I don't think Fifita was really that uncomfortable for most of the game. And for a guy who's starting his first college game, I would love to see them make him uncomfortable. And credit to Arizona. They did a good job of protecting him too. Those tackles were played really well. Their offensive line did really well as a whole. They were able to run the ball. Like, they were able to do a lot of things where they were just able to extend drives. And that was probably the most frustrating part watching the defense, was that they just didn't seem like some drives, they just couldn't get off the field. And they got helped by some penalties. Obviously, there were some calls where you're like, what is happening? Pac-12 refs type thing.
Last year of it.
Yeah, finally. But yeah, I thought they did what they needed to do in the end. Obviously, they got the win, but there were some things that I just, it's just kind of frustrating.
Lars, what do you think?
Just wait until those officials move to the Big Ten. Watch. But no, but with that being, but Ben makes an excellent point. I mean, I think the thing we've seen this year is Jabbar Muhammad is locked down one side of the field. Where Washington has struggled is when Jabbar is not on the field. At times, I don't know, Ben, if you've seen this on film, but Jabbar is on the sideline in the second quarter or even late in the first quarter, and it's Elijah on one side and Thaddeus Dixon on the other. And I think they're just letting him roll. And I almost wonder, is that part of the scheme, or is that trying to test them and kind of see, hey, we obviously know what we got with Jabbar. Can you guys actually hold up on your own? And kind of also, what's your kind of opinion on Thaddeus Dixon? Because I know
I loved him. I've been really impressed. I think there's some, Can
you say that again for Lars?
I've loved it. I really have. I thought he's been good. Like, obviously he's young. You can't expect a ton. Like, you go in with fairly low expectations for a young corner, especially against those type of receivers. But he played really well. I think he held his own. I'm not like excited. I wouldn't be excited about him being like left out there all alone. But I think, as the season progresses, a lot of these guys just need reps. They need reps against good receivers. They need to, get their feet wet, be a little uncomfortable. But I think they're doing a decent job of giving guys help. Like, they are playing off coverage. They understand that these guys, they don't quite have the route recognition yet. They don't have the instincts to be left alone So they're letting things come to them and then play off of that kind of. But I would love to see them just kind of challenge them a little bit more with like a little more press coverage, a little more, just again, making the defense uncomfortable, because I think right now they're letting offenses get comfortable and get in a rhythm. And I think that makes it harder going forward with those guys, because once the offense gets in a rhythm, it's just going to become even harder for these corners to cover good receivers. And again, coming up with Oregon, Troy Franklin is incredible. I am very high on someone like Troy Franklin. I think he's probably going to push himself into the first round conversation when it comes around to draft time. So that is going to be a huge challenge for these guys on keeping him contained.
Lars, what else you got here?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think that's kind of the interesting thing about this defense is, I mean, like they're staying healthy, they're able to play, but when you're looking at the first 5 weeks of the season, they've been good, right? But it's also the level of competition hasn't been great. I mean, Tyrone McMillan was the first receiver to have multiple touchdowns in a game this season against any Washington defensive back. Mm-hmm. The problem that I have is it's like, okay, what happens when you play Oregon when Bo Nix is going to be running around and he's a better veteran, and you have versus Noah Fifita versus, I mean, whoever Cal ran out there. I mean, there's so many other quarterbacks that Washington has faced that just aren't as good as Bo and Caleb and, who else they're going to play down the season. And I'm kind of curious, the longer this team goes playing running quarterbacks, can the DBs outside of Jabbar Muhammad actually hold up when the plays break down, outside of when Bo is scrambling or when DJ scrambles or when Caleb scrambles like forward for yards? I'm talking about like scrambling outside the pocket to keep the play alive, because that's where Washington, I feel like, has broken down a lot on deep. When they have broken down on defense, that's where it's been, when they're outside the pocket and basically it's like a jailbreak play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, luckily for them, I don't think Oregon does a whole ton of that. Bo does like to scramble occasionally, but for the most part, Will Stein and Bo Nix like to keep things very on schedule. The ball comes out. Like they run a lot of RPO. They do a lot of short stuff. As we know, there's, Bo's average depth of target is not long. Like he's not throwing deep very often, but they do that in order to take the deep shots. They make Bo, he gets the ball out. They run a lot of play action, and then they throw those deep shots. And they've done a really good job hitting this year. Obviously, same thing as Washington, like level of competition. They haven't really played anybody where you're like, wow, they really beat somebody that's really good. But I think that's going to be a challenge for them, especially because they're going to have to tackle better than they have, because Oregon is going to get guys in space. Will Stein is really good at scheming his guys into space, getting those. They have a lot of good athletes at receiver, so getting those guys in space and hopefully making guys miss. That's what they're hoping. Washington is going to have to get better tackling, or it's going to be a long game in terms of those short passes turning into long gains.
Is there anyone you might want to play closer to the line of scrimmage just to kind of avoid that, or maybe spy Bo Nix or anything like that?
It's hard when you think about that. I would love to play Dom Hampton a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. I think he can get he has some struggles just, when things are so far away from him, like coming up and making those plays. I really like it when he's down, he's close to the line of scrimmage. He can make plays on tight ends. Like Oregon loves to use their tight ends on like little rollouts or little dump offs, like leak passes. So I'd love to see Dom Hampton come down and play a little bit more of that and keep Bo, keep that a little bit more in check, just because Dom is such a good athlete.
Moving right along here. Ben, you've given me some takes behind the scenes, just kind of when we were trying to make sure we could make all this work. And I just kind of want to give you free reign for anything, roster related, Pac-12 related, whatever it is that you want. I know there's one in particular that you wanted to get out there. And I know Lars will be particularly interested in this one as well. I kept it from him to get a live reaction.
Is this the Utah one? Is that what you're talking about?
It is.
Yeah. So I just finished watching Utah last night. I watched the Oregon State Utah game last night. And if Utah does not get Rising back, anytime this season, we don't really know what's happening there. I feel like every week they're like, Rising's going to come back. And then they're like, okay, we're going to throw Nate Johnson out there again. I think at this point, Washington would destroy Utah, because that Utah offense is probably one of the worst in the Pac-12, save for Stanford. Nate Johnson is just not there as a thrower yet. They don't let him do a whole lot, which is also frustrating to watch, from a tape perspective, just because he's a freak athlete. There's not a lot of quarterbacks that can move like he can, but he's just not there as a thrower. They aren't letting him do anything. Their running backs are hurt. They're just like, everybody's hurt there. It feels like they have a bunch of guys out. But I don't think they would not be able to keep up with Washington. Like, their defense is legit. Their defense is probably top, whatever you want to say, top 10, top 15 in the country, if not higher than that. But I think Washington can break through that defense for, a bunch of scores still, probably like 28, 30 points. But Utah's offense is not going to be able to keep up, unfortunately, for them.
I see. I was very intrigued by that. And as Lars continues to fight through his illness, I want to know what you got to say.
What I gotta say about that?
Yeah,
I think it's kind of, this is Utah's down year of the last 3 years, right? I mean, without Cam Rising, the ironic part about his last name, the Rising, I kind of love that. I kind of love that element of the whole situation. But I think that Utah doesn't have the running backs that they're used to having in previous years. That's also part of that offense where the ground and pound balances out Cam Rising and the quarterback play. When you don't have that and you're more reliant on the pass game, they don't have a quarterback, as Ben mentioned, that there's just not that level there. Defensively, sure, they can keep you in it for a couple of drives and maybe buy you a drive here and there. But Washington's defense, as we've said, isn't terrible. It's not great, but it's not like the worst in the conference here. So I think Washington's defense would balance out that enough to where those other drives that Utah would get wouldn't matter. And so I think, again, it would become more like Cal without that fourth quarter pile on of stats that made the score look a little bit skewed than it actually was.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's unfortunate. Like, I mean, from a Utah perspective, like, it's unfortunate to watch Utah because they have so much talent. Like, that defense is probably not going to be as talented next year. Like, they lose a couple guys who are on the older side. So it's just like they're kind of wasting that defense. Like, it's just, the offense just can't keep up. And they've done a really good job against who they played defensively. I think Dante Moore, like young guy, DJ is, he is what he is, but Michael Penix is a different breed, obviously. Like he's not those guys. He's not young. He's not going to get fooled by some of the stuff that they were doing against Dante Moore. So I think that it's going to be a huge piece for them when that game comes around.
So Ben, this is nothing. Oh, sorry. No, Lars, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say on a different question, but on that same note, how much have you noticed when you watch Michael Penix on film, his decision making being better this season than it was last season? Because I mean, it wasn't bad last season, right? But he seemed to force it, like the UCLA game, the Arizona State game, where he seemed to force it a lot more than he is this year. Where he's still taking those shots, but he has maybe 3 bad decisions all year.
Yeah. I think he's done a way better job. I think the forcing the ball is a lot like. He is so confident in his arm, and that's great. I think it's awesome that he's that confident in his arm. Like, you will not find guys that are that willing to make throws into such tiny windows, and make those throws. But I think there are times it mostly bites him when he's like scrambling or trying to create out of structure. I think he's not the best there, and that's fine. Like, that's not what the offense wants to do anyways. So that's fine. But I think it's once that play kind of gets extended, like those bad decisions, that's when they kind of come. Like, you just want to see him, throw the ball away, like just get rid of it, move on to the next play. Don't try to force it into coverage, miss a safety, streaking down the field, something like that. But I think he's done a lot better job at attacking the middle of the field. I think that was kind of the big criticism for him last year, was just that he was so vertically oriented. Like, I want to get the ball 40 yards downfield every time I drop back. But this year he's been way more willing to, just take the dump off, take the check down, take the drag route, like attack the middle of the field. And I think that's a big part of why they didn't quite have as much success against Arizona, is because Jalen McMillan wasn't playing. That's Jalen McMillan. One of the best traits of Jalen McMillan is he's so good at attacking the middle of the field. So not having that in that game, when you have Jalen Polk and Rome Odunze who love to attack vertically, you don't have that kind of that complements of wide receivers.
What do you think this has done for his draft stock, just kind of moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough one to peg, because it's going to come down to medicals. I think for a lot of what his draft stock is going to be, and who knows, like what that's going to show. Like, it's possible that that's not pretty for him, because he's had the 4 season-ending injuries. A lot of them have been like weird injuries. It's not like he's got like some chronic condition. You hope, but I think like he could push round 1. Like, I'm fairly confident in saying that he could push into round 1, maybe like late round 1, just depending on medicals. But it just depends on that. That's going to be like the biggest question I feel like that's going to be left. I don't think he's leaving a lot of questions in terms of his play, but it's just going to kind of be that stuff that is really out of his control at this point. That's going to kind of determine where he ends up going.
So this is something I know Lars and I have had long discussions about on this show, and something especially once we move like kind of into the off season and into draft season again, not like we're looking past this truly incredible season that is hopefully going to continue. How many guys do you think that we could see like first round and like top 3 and just maybe drafted in general?
Oh boy. I think first round, I think honestly you could end up seeing like 3, maybe 4 guys get drafted in the first round.
Ooh.
I think because you got Rome, Penix, obviously. I think Jalen could sneak in there. I love Jalen. I don't know if he comes out this year. Like, I don't know what the deal is going to be.
Jalen McMillan.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
this is Lars' agenda right here. So this is
I have loved Jalen McMillan. Like, he is incredible. He obviously, like, he's had the injury, so maybe he ends up coming back for another year. We can hope that he comes back for another year. But I think NFL teams are going to love guys like him. Same with Jalen Polk. I think teams are going to love a guy like that has that kind of hands. I don't think he's like a first round pick by any means. I think he's probably like day 2, round 3 type guy who works into a starting lineup. I love Roger Rosengarten. I think he's been tremendous this year. He had a couple rough games start the year, but he was so good against Arizona. I was just like in awe. I was just like focused on him. I was like having to draw my attention to the whole offense because I'm just like focused on him. I think he's tremendous. Bralen Trice, obviously, like, he hasn't had the numbers, but frankly, I don't really care like that he hasn't had the numbers, because he's such a freak. Like, there's not a lot of guys at his size that can move like he can. So I think he works his way into round 1 as long as he continues to, we saw the sack, obviously. So hopefully he puts up some numbers in the next few weeks. But yeah, I think there's a ton of guys on this team that are NFL guys. You don't find a collection of talent like this, especially on offense. Like you think about the last team that had this much talent on their offense, it's probably the LSU team that had their entire offense was drafted basically on it and on an NFL team. So it's like, this doesn't exist normally. Like this is not normal. So we have to enjoy it while we have it, because a lot of these guys are not going to be here next year.
You played right into Lars. It's just everything that he is about on this show just now. So I'm gonna let him go from here.
So one guy that you didn't mention but has played really well, Jabbar Muhammad. Do you think he could be? I think he's a day 2 guy, second, third round. Just he doesn't wow you, but he's also a lockdown guy, kind of consistently never gets targeted. Is he a guy you think could come out and be a day 2 pick this year, or is he better served to come back?
I don't know that he's better served to come back. He's kind of a guy, I don't really think he has a lot left to show. Like, he's not really going to get better by going back for another year. I think he's probably like a day 3, like that kind of type, like maybe like PFA if someone doesn't draft him. Just because he's small, like he's limited in size, and that's going to be the biggest thing for him is, is he gonna move inside at the next level? Our team's gonna be really comfortable playing him outside. I think this week is going to be a huge test because Troy Flanken is like 6'2", 6'3". If he can keep up with that kind of guy, like if he can play, he plays really well outside of his frame. I think he plays bigger than he is, which is really important if you're going to be that size. And if he can really show that, hey, I can keep up with a guy like Troy Franklin, who's going to probably be an NFL starter, as a rookie, then, I think you can have more of the discussion about like, where does he fall in the draft? But he's going to have to show it like against these better receivers that they start playing.
I've got one more guy for you here before we let you go. Troy Fautanu was just kind of the one name that I know you didn't exclude him for any reason, but I'm just curious as what you think, because there's some debate whether he's a tackle or a guard, and just kind of what you think his future is and where you see his draft stock going.
Yeah. I think he's probably ends up being more of a guard at the next level. I think this year it's hard because you don't want to move a guy just to move a guy. Like, you don't want to just be like, you don't have the size, you're not, you don't have the arm length. That's kind of the big determiner. So you should play guard because he is good at tackle. But the point comes when, you watch him against guys that are longer, against edge rushers that are longer, and he does struggle occasionally with, guys get inside his frame and he can't quite latch on, the way that he can, the way that you see that he can. So then you kind of have the discussion of, is it worth moving him inside? Because honestly, I think that's a better fit for him. And I think he will be a way better guard than he will be at tackle. I think that ends up being his future.
Is that?
Oh, wow. Okay.
We're fighting right through. Oh, that's all of us.
That's what mine was. That's why I went off. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We just had the national emergency.
That was not just me. That was everybody.
We're just gonna play all the way through that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he could end up being a first rounder, like as a guard. That's up to teams to decide where he's gonna land in terms of that valuation, just because that's hard for some teams to project. Some teams don't want to do that. Some teams don't want to take a guard in the first round. But I think his long-term fit is probably at guard. Not to say he's a bad tackle. He's been great for UW this year. So I think it'll be interesting to see, who drafts him, what they need, where they put him. Because I think and again, like that flexibility at tackle is huge for teams. Like if they have a guy who they can kick out to tackle, when somebody gets hurt, inevitably somebody gets hurt and they can kick a guy out to tackle, that's super important too. So there's a lot of factors that go into where he's going to end up getting taken. I think he's going to be a stellar like day 2 pick. He could be a day 1 starter at guard. So it'll just be interesting to see where he goes.
Ben, plug your stuff.
Oh, Twitter at Ben Glassmire NFL. I don't do a lot of like written content like these guys do. Like you should read everything they put out. I do. But I post a lot of clips. I'll put out, a lot of Washington clips, a lot of Pac-12 clips. That's kind of what I'm focused on. So if you want Pac-12 content, like go follow me over on Twitter.
Ben, thank you so much for being here. Lars, as always, it's always great having you here, even though you got like half a day off today, and I know you're just kind of relishing in it over there. And to all the everydayers out there, we really appreciate you turning in. We really hope you enjoyed Ben's content. We're really excited to have him back on here again very soon. And until then, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are everywhere. We really hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for Friday.